The morning Callum Okafor's divorce became final. The temperature in Edmonton dropped to -22, and the courthouse heating system decided it had had enough. He waited. That was the thing nobody told you about divorce. How much of it was just waiting. Waiting in hallways that smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. Waiting for a clerk to hand you a piece of paper that confirmed what you already knew. That 5 years, a house on 87th Avenue, and a daughter who still slept with a stuffed rabbit named Gerald were now officially, legally, two separate things. The clerk who handed him the envelope was maybe 23 years old. She said, "Have a good one," without looking up. Callum stood outside on the steps with the envelope in his hand and the cold pressing against his face like a flat palm, and he thought, now what? His daughter was at school. He had 3 hours before pickup. He didn't go back to his truck right away. He sat on the concrete step. It was that cold, and he sat there anyway, and opened the envelope and read the paper even though his lawyer had already walked him through every line of it. Somewhere behind him, a pigeon made a sound like a question it had given up on. He was 38 years old. He owned a small flooring company with 2 full-time employees and a van that needed new brake pads. He had a daughter named Bridget who was 7 and who had recently decided she was basically a chef and who made him eat scrambled eggs with ketchup 3 times a week because she was basically a chef, and that was apparently what chefs did. He had those things. He had those. He folded the paper and put it back in the envelope and walked to his truck. He did not cry. He thought he might later in the parking lot of a Canadian Tire somewhere, the way men sometimes did. But not then. Not on the steps. The woman was standing beside a silver sedan 2 rows over. She was on the phone, speaking in a low-clipped voice, and she was not dressed for -22. She had on a coat, a good coat, the kind that cost real money, but she was in heels, and the heels were not winning the argument with the parking lot ice. Callum watched her slip, not fall. Just slip, catch herself on the car door, look down at her shoes with the expression of someone adding another grievance to a very long list. He should have kept walking. "You want me to get some sand from the truck? There's a box I use for the van." She looked up from the phone. She had dark hair pulled back, eyes that assessed quickly, the particular wariness of someone who dealt with strangers professionally and had learned not to trust that they were actually trying to help. She said something into the phone, "I'll call you back," and put it in her coat pocket. "Sand," she said. "Or I can pull my truck closer so you've got something to hold on to." She looked at his truck. She looked at him. She made some kind of calculation. The sand would be fine. Thank you. Her name, he would learn later, was Genevieve Martel. He did not know that yet. He just knew she had a look on her face while he poured a thin line of sand along the path to her car, like she was watching something she didn't quite have a category for, and it bothered her that she didn't. "Long morning?" he asked. He didn't know why he said it. "It was what you said. You could call it that." She opened her car door. "You?" He held up the envelope. She nodded. She understood immediately what it was. He could tell by the way her expression shifted, not to pity, which he would have hated, but to something quieter. "I'm sorry," she said. "It was the right call," he said. That was also true. She got in her car. He went back to his truck. He sat there for a moment with the heater running and watched her pull out of the lot, and then he drove to a Tim Hortons and ordered a large coffee and a plain bagel and ate it in the parking lot because he could not think of anywhere else to be. He did not think about her again. There was too much else. There was Bridget to think about, the schedule, the new arrangement where Callum had her weekdays and his ex-wife, Paula, had every other weekend and alternating holidays. Paula had already moved in with her boyfriend in St. Albert. Bridget had met him twice and reported, with the clinical detachment of a 7-year-old gathering data, that he had a lot of exercise equipment and makes weird protein things in a blender. There was the flooring company, a school gymnasium contract in Sherwood Park that was behind schedule because of a supplier delay. 2 jobs pending in Leduc. His employee, Devin, had sprained his wrist and was working at half speed. There was the house on 87th Avenue, which they had agreed to sell, and which meant Callum needed to find somewhere else to live, somewhere with a 2nd bedroom, somewhere close to Bridget's school, somewhere under what he could actually afford now that a mortgage he had split with a second income was now his alone. He looked at apartments on his phone late at night, after Bridget was asleep. He set his coffee on the nightstand and scrolled through photos of other people's empty rooms and tried to imagine Bridget's drawings on those walls, her shoes by those doors. He didn't tell her about the house yet. She had enough new things already. He ran into Genevieve Martel 6 weeks later at a hardware store on 11th Street. He almost didn't recognize her. She was in jeans and a flannel-lined vest, no heels, her hair down. She was standing in the paint aisle, staring at color swatches with the focused intensity of someone diffusing something. He recognized the coat first. The good coat, draped over her arm. "The sand helped," she said, before he could say anything. He laughed. It came out genuine, which surprised him. He hadn't laughed that much lately. They stood in the paint aisle for longer than made sense. She was repainting a room in a house she was trying to decide what to do with. He was there for grout sealant and had gotten distracted. She asked what he did, and he said flooring, and she asked what kind, and he said all kinds, and she said she had been meaning to replace the hardwood in her front hall for a year and kept putting it off. "I could take a look," he said. "No obligation." It was a professional offer, that was all it was. She gave him her card. He looked at it in his truck afterward. Genevieve Martel, Chief Operating Officer, Martel Group. He had heard of the Martel Group. Anyone in Edmonton construction had heard of the Martel Group. Commercial real estate, development, property management. The family company had been a fixture in the city for 30 years. It had been founded by her father, Henri Martel, who had died 2 years ago, and whose passing had been a front-page item in the Edmonton Journal. Callum set the card on his dashboard. He thought, "She's way out of your tax bracket," he thought. "You're a man in a van with brake pads that still needed replacing." He texted her about the hardwood anyway, because he had said he would, and he did what he said. She was at the house on a Saturday afternoon when he came to look at the hall floor. The house was in Glenora. Old Glenora, the kind of neighborhood where the trees were 100 years old and the houses had bones. Hers was a stone and brick Tudor with a covered porch and a garden that had been carefully put to bed for winter. The front hall floor was original white oak, maybe 80 years old, with water damage near the door and a section that had lifted and warped. Callum crouched down and ran his hand along it and said, "Honestly, it's worth saving. This isn't install new, this is restore. Take longer, cost more, but in 20 years you'll still have original hardwood and not a factory board." She was leaning against the doorframe with her arms crossed, watching him. "You'd tell me that even if restore costs more?" "The margins on restoration work are lower," he said. "New install is faster, easier. But this floor is worth it." That she was quiet for a moment. "My father put this floor in," she said. "Well, he had it put in when he bought the house." Callum looked up. "I know," he said. "I can tell from the installation method. Mid-century work. Whoever did it knew what they were doing." She looked at the floor. Something in her face shifted in the particular way that faces shifted when they were remembering someone. "He'd have liked you," she said. Then she seemed surprised she had said it, and straightened up and asked if he wanted coffee. She made coffee in a kitchen that was warm and a little cluttered in the way that meant someone actually lived in it. There were papers on the counter. A child's drawing stuck to the fridge with a magnet. He noticed the drawing but didn't say anything. She set 2 mugs on the kitchen table and sat across from him, and they talked about the floor for a while, timeline materials, whether she wanted to match the existing finish or shift slightly warmer, and then they talked about other things. The way you did sometimes with a stranger, when the conversation found a current and you let it run. She had been at the courthouse that morning because of an estate matter. Her father's will had been contested by a cousin she described, without rancor, as not a good person. The case had been dragging for a year and a half. "That's exhausting," Callum said. "It is," she said, "it is." He told her about the gymnasium contract in Sherwood Park. She asked good questions, the kind that came from understanding project timelines and contracts, not just being polite. He did not mention the divorce. She did not ask. Before he left, he noticed the drawing on the fridge again. A house, a son, 2 figures. One small, one tall. Under the tall one, in the careful block letters of a child learning to write, "Mama." He gave her a quote the following Monday. Fair price. He'd be losing a bit on the restoration hours, but it was the right recommendation, and he'd made it, and he wasn't going to walk it back now. She accepted it without negotiating. Work started 2 weeks later. Callum came with Devon, who was back at full strength, and they spent 3 days on that hall floor. Careful work, slow work, the kind that required patience and attention and a willingness to stop when you weren't sure. Genevieve was home part of the time. She worked from the kitchen table on a laptop, speaking on calls in the clipped professional voice he had first heard in the parking lot, occasionally coming to check progress and asking questions that were specific and intelligent. On the second day, she brought lunch. She said she had made too much soup. He suspected this was not strictly true. On the third day, when the floor was finished and the final coat was curing and they were packing the van, she came out to the porch. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's a good floor," he said. "My father would have said the same thing." She had her hands in her vest pockets. "Listen, I want to ask you something. You can say no. He waited. I have a daughter, she said. Odette, she's 9. I don't know if you noticed the drawing. I noticed. Her father, we were never married. He left when she was 3. He has not been part of her life and has made it clear he doesn't intend to be. She said this without drama, as a fact. I've been alone with her for 6 years. I run a company. I have a lawsuit. I have a house I'm trying to fix up because Odette wants to grow up in it. She stopped. I'm getting to the point. I'm sorry, I'm circling. Take your time, he said. I have a charity gala next month, she said. The Martel Group does a lot of work with the Edmonton Community Foundation. My name is in the program. My father's name is in the atrium. It's the kind of event where everyone asks you about your life and makes certain kinds of assumptions about why a woman in her position is. She paused, unattached. He said nothing. He was listening. I'd like to go with someone who isn't going to make it complicated, she said. I'm not asking for anything other than one evening. You seem like someone who understands uncomplicated. I have a daughter too, he said. She's 7. I'd need to sort out childcare for the night. Genevieve blinked. He had surprised her. But yes, he said. I can do that. He did not tell Bridget where he was going that night. He told her Uncle Devon was looking after her and they were going to make pizza and watch a movie, which Bridget received as excellent news. He found a suit at the back of his closet that still fit, mostly. He shined his shoes in the bathroom while Bridget critiqued his technique from the doorway. You missed a spot, she said. Which one? She came over and pointed with enormous authority at a perfectly shined area of the toe. That one, she said. You sure? Dada, I'm basically a chef. I know shoes. He laughed. He kissed her on the head. He drove to Glenora. Genevieve came to the door in a dark green dress and her hair up, and he thought, not for the first time, that she was the kind of person who occupied a room differently than he did. Not better, exactly. Just differently, like she had learned the weight of rooms and how to carry them. You look nice, she said. You too, he said. They drove downtown. She was quiet in the car, not uncomfortable quiet, thinking quiet. He had learned in the past few weeks to read the difference. The gala was at the Fairmont. There were several hundred people in a room that smelled like flowers and money and good catering. There were plaques with the Martel name on them. There was a photo of her father, Henri, near the registration table. A square-jawed man with her same careful eyes. People came to her. All evening, people came to her. Board members, city councilors, foundation directors, other executives whose names Callum didn't know. She introduced him as Callum Shaw, my guest, and he shook hands and listened and said the right amount and no more. There was a man named Paul Deshane who came by twice. The second time, he touched Genevieve's elbow without asking. She stepped away. She did it smoothly, the way someone did who had learned to make corrections without making scenes. In the car on the way back, she said, Paul Deschaines is on the board of the company. He believes, because he was my father's oldest friend, that I am in some ongoing need of his guidance. He touches people when they don't want to be touched, Callum said. Yes, she said, he does. They were quiet for a block. He's also the one who introduced me to Odette's father, she said. She did not say anything else about it. He did not ask. When he pulled up in front of her house, she said thank you, and meant it in a way that had weight to it. He said of course. He drove home and picked up Bridget, who was asleep on Devon's couch, and carried her to the truck, and she woke up just enough to say, Did you have fun, Dada? And he said yes, and she went back to sleep. Here is what he did not know yet. The lawsuit over Henri Martel's estate was not, at its heart, about money. It was about a clause in the will, a clause written by a man who had loved his daughter fiercely, but who had also been, in certain ways, a man of his generation. The clause stated that primary control of Martel Group's voting shares would transfer to Genevieve outright, with one condition. The condition had seemed to Henri like a reasonable thing, a practical measure, a protection against isolation. He had not meant it as a test or a punishment. He had meant it as a father who had watched his daughter eat lunch alone at her desk for years, and who worried in the particular wordless way of fathers who did not know how to say such things, that she would be alone forever. The condition was this, that Genevieve be in a recognized domestic partnership by the time Odette turned 10. Odette would turn 10 in 4 months. The contesting cousin, Bernard Martel, a man whose defining characteristic was his certainty that he deserved more than he'd been given, had discovered this clause 6 months ago. His lawyers had been very, very interested in it. If Genevieve was not in a recognized domestic partnership by that date, the voting shares reverted to a trust administered by the board, a board on which Paul Deschaines sat. There was one other thing. Odette had a medical condition, a rare mitochondrial disorder, diagnosed when she was 4. It was being managed. She was mostly well, but the management required continuous specialist care, specific medication, and a medical team in Toronto that Genevieve flew her to every 3 months. It required, more than anything, stability. The kind of stability that came from a mother who was not in the middle of a legal battle over her ability to run her own company. Genevieve had not told Callum any of this. She had gone to the courthouse that morning, not for estate paperwork, but for a hearing in the custody matter she hadn't mentioned, connected to the same lawsuit, in which Bernard's lawyers were arguing, with a straight face, that a single mother running a company in litigation was a demonstrably unstable environment for a child. She was fighting on 3 fronts simultaneously. She had gone to a hardware store and looked at paint chips because she needed 15 minutes of ordinary, and then a man in a work jacket had offered her sand on a patch of ice. And she had thought, ordinary is possible. It still exists. She called him on a Tuesday. He was in the van outside a job site in Leduc, eating a sandwich, when his phone buzzed. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. "And I want to be honest with you before I ask what I'm going to ask, because you deserve to make the decision with the full information." He put down the sandwich. She told him everything, the clause, the date, Bernard Martel and Paul Duchesne and the board, Odette's condition, not gravely, not catastrophically, but clearly, so he understood what was at stake. She told him in the same tone she used for project timelines, direct, without performing calm, but also without performing distress. When she finished, there was a silence. "So," she said, "you understand what I'm asking." "I understand what you're asking," he said. "You can say no," she said. "I'll figure something out. What does domestic partnership mean legally in this context?" She paused. He had surprised her again. He was asking the practical question, not the emotional one. A formal registered domestic partnership in Alberta, or a marriage. The clause uses language that would include both. How long would it need to be in place? Until the lawsuit resolves. Could be 6 months. Would I need to move in? It would help the case. It wouldn't be strictly required from the legal side, but Bernard's lawyers would make it an issue. Callum looked out the windshield at the job site. Devon was talking to the site supervisor by the door. A crow was walking along the fence line with great purposefulness. "Bridget can't move again right now," he said. "She's had too much change, I understand. If she's in my care, she comes with me. I can't have a living arrangement she doesn't know about or isn't part of." "I wouldn't want it any other way," Genevieve said, then quietly. "Odette needs stability. I think they might be fine." "You think?" "I think Odette would make anyone prove themselves first. She's 9, and she is very much her grandfather's granddaughter." A small pause. "She would probably make you eat something she's cooked and judge you on your reaction." "Bridget's basically a chef," Callum said. "They'd get along." There was another silence. "Callum," she said, "I know what I'm asking. I know it's not smalls with me. Let me think until the end of the week." He thought until Wednesday. He told Bridget on a Saturday morning while she was eating cereal at the kitchen table. He told her that he had a friend named Genevieve, and that Genevieve had a daughter named Odette, and that he and Genevieve were going to try something, living in the same house for a while to help each other out. Bridget ate cereal. "Is Odette nice?" she asked. "I think so. I haven't spent much time with her yet." "What grade is she in?" "Grade 4. Bridget considered this with the seriousness the situation deserved. "Does she like scrambled eggs?" she asked. "I honestly don't know. I'll make them," Bridget said. "Then we'll find out." Moving in took 2 weekends. Callum brought Bridget's things first. The rabbit named Gerald, the drawings, the specific pillow she could not sleep without. He wanted her room to feel like hers before anything else happened. Odette met them at the door the second weekend. She had Genevieve's dark hair and her grandfather's careful eyes and an expression of frank assessment that reminded Callum very much of himself as a child. She shook Bridget's hand, which no 7-year-old expected, and Bridget looked briefly startled and then gravely returned the shake, because she was basically a chef and she knew how to handle a formal situation. "You can have the room next to mine," Odette said. "The closet is smaller, but the window is better." "Better how?" Bridget asked. "You can see the bird feeder from it. There are chickadees." "I like chickadees," Bridget said. "Good," said Odette. "Come on." They went upstairs. Callum and Genevieve stood in the front hall, the restored hall, the white oak floor gleaming under the afternoon light, and listened to the sound of 2 small people deciding, incrementally, that the other one was acceptable. "Henry would have liked that," Genevieve said quietly. "Your father? He had a bird feeder in every house he ever lived in," she said. "He said it was how you knew if a place was home, if something came to eat." The lawsuit did not resolve quickly. Nothing involving Bernard Martel and a lawyer who billed by the quarter hour resolved quickly. There were hard weeks. There was a week in February when Genevieve flew to Toronto with Odette for a medical appointment, and the results required an adjustment in Odette's treatment protocol. And Genevieve came home on a Friday evening and sat at the kitchen table and did not move for a long time. Callum made dinner. He did not ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. He made pasta because it was what he had, and he called Bridget down, and the four of them ate at the table. And Bridget talked for 22 minutes about a project she was doing about penguins, and Odette asked 3 excellent penguin questions. And by the time the plates were cleared, Genevieve had come back into herself in some quiet, necessary way. She said thank you later when the girls were in bed. He said it was pasta. She smiled, and it was the first time he had seen her smile without anything held back. There were good weeks, too. There was a Sunday in March when Bridget convinced Odette that they should make what she called chef's breakfast, which turned out to be scrambled eggs with an alarming quantity of shredded cheddar, toast cut into triangles, and orange juice in the good glasses. Odette plated everything with architectural precision. Genevieve and Callum sat at the table in their respective states of early morning function and ate every bite and said it was excellent, which it genuinely was. "We're a good team," Bridget told Odette. "We're a reasonable team," Odette said, which was for Odette high praise. Paul Deschaines came to the house in April. He called ahead, which Callum thought was the one decent thing about him. He said he wanted to talk to Genevieve about the upcoming board meeting. He did not say he wanted to see for himself whether this arrangement was real, but that was what he came for. Callum was there when he arrived. He had no intention of going anywhere. He offered the man coffee because it was his house now too, or near enough, and Paul Deschaines sat at the kitchen table and looked around at the evidence. The children's drawings on the fridge, Bridget's rain boots by the door, a project about penguins on the counter, a flooring company invoice with coffee ring stains because someone had set a mug on it without thinking. Paul Deschaines talked to Genevieve about the board meeting for 20 minutes. Then he looked at Callum. "And you," he said, "you do floors." "I do floors," Callum said. "Henry was a carpenter, you know. Before everything." Callum hadn't known that. "He would have talked to you about it," Genevieve said, "for longer than you wanted." Paul Deschaines looked at her. Something moved across his face, something old and complicated. Whatever it was, it did not help him. He left without making the trouble he had come to make. The case settled in May. Bernard Martel had overplayed his hand, as people who believe they deserve more than they have generally do. One of his lawyers had made a procedural error. The other had made the larger error of underestimating how prepared Genevieve's team was. The settlement gave Bernard a cash payment that was significantly less than he'd been seeking and no claim on the voting shares. Genevieve called Callum from her office. He was on a job site in Windermere, crouched over a floor measurement when his phone buzzed. "It's over," she said. He sat back on his heels. "You okay?" A pause. "I don't know yet," she said. "I think I will be. I'll pick up the girls," he said. "You come home when you're ready." She came home at 7. The girls had eaten, and Bridget was asleep, and Odette was reading in her room with the light on. Callum had made tea. Actual tea, not the coffee he defaulted to, because Genevieve drank tea when things were big and coffee when things were ordinary, and he had learned to notice. She sat at the kitchen table and wrapped her hands around the mug and said nothing for a while. He sat across from her and also said nothing. Eventually, she said, "When I was growing up, my father used to say, be someone who builds things. Don't be someone who tries to take what other people built." She looked at the mug. "I think that's the most useful thing he ever told me." "It's a good thing," Callum said. "He would have said you build things. I fix floors." "You know that's not what I mean." He did know. Outside, the bird feeder was doing its quiet business in the spring dark. Something had come to eat. A chickadee, probably, bold and small and utterly certain it belonged there. What happened after the settlement was not a declaration. It was not a scene. People who have been through real difficulty tend to fall toward each other the way water finds its level. Gradually, without announcement, until you look around and realize you have arrived somewhere and you meant to. Bridget noticed before either of the adults said anything. She reported to Odette with scientific confidence that Callum and Genevieve had been standing next to each other in the kitchen for a very long time without doing anything useful, which in Bridget's experience meant something was happening. Odette considered this intelligence seriously. "Are you okay with it?" she asked. "Are you?" Odette thought for a moment. "She's been sad for a long time," Odette said. "He's not sad." Bridget nodded. She understood this to be the whole point. "I can make eggs tomorrow," she said. "To celebrate. With the cheddar, obviously." Callum did not propose with a ring and a glass of champagne at a restaurant. He was not built for that kind of scene, and Genevieve would not have wanted it. He brought it up on a Sunday morning in the kitchen over actual coffee, while Odette was at her extracurricular and Bridget was upstairs engaged in some complex project involving cardboard and tape that she refused to explain. He said, "The legal reason for this arrangement is over. You know that," she said. "I'm not going anywhere. I want you to know that's not because of an arrangement." She looked at him. "Callum, I'm not good at this kind of thing," he said. "I just want to be clear about what I'm saying." "You are," she said. "Being clear." "Okay," she said. It was not poetry. But it was honest, and it was theirs, and it was enough. The floors in the house on 87th Avenue sold along with the house in the end. Someone else's family lived there now. Callum drove past it once, early in the summer, for no particular reason, and saw a bike with training wheels on the front porch and a plant someone had put in the window and thought, "That's fine, that's good, actually." He drove home to Glenora. The white oak floor was glowing in the afternoon light, the way old things glow when they are properly cared for. Bridget's rain boots were by the door. Odette's research project on mitochondria was spread across the kitchen table because she was 9, and she was her grandfather's granddaughter, and she was going to understand this thing fully whether it wanted to be understood or not. Genevieve was in the garden, cutting back something that had grown past the fence line. Callum stood on the porch and watched her for a moment. She looked up and said, "There's something that needs looking at in the back bedroom. The baseboard is lifting." "I'll look at it," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I mentioned it." He crouched down in the back bedroom and ran his hand along the baseboard and found the spot where the wall had shifted slightly over the decades. Just enough for a gap to form, just enough for cold air to find its way in. It was a small thing, an easy fix. He got his kit. He did what he had always done. He showed up, he looked at what was broken, and he put it right.